I'm not the type of person who gets spooked easily, which is probably why being a live-in nanny for a 6-year-old boy in a big, empty house didn't really faze me until last night, when the phone rang at exactly 2:13 a.m., shattering the silence like a gunshot in the dark. At first, I thought I imagined it, just one of those half-awake auditory hallucinations that happen when you're teetering on the edge of sleep, but then it rang again, an old-school rotary phone shrieking from the hallway downstairs, its mechanical chime echoing up the wooden staircase. I lay there for a second, my brain sluggish, trying to piece together why the hell a house that belonged to a modern, upper-class family even had a landline, let alone one that sounded like it came straight from a Hitchcock movie. I forced myself out of bed, every step hesitant, the kind of slow, measured movement you do when you're not entirely convinced you want to reach your destination, but I told myself I was being ridiculous, just a wrong number. Just some late-night drunk dialing, just some telemarketer who didn't check their time zone. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs and picked up the receiver, pressing it to my ear with an odd, creeping hesitation, the voice on the other end cut through the static, low and urgent, unmistakably female, and I swear to God, my stomach turned to ice the second she spoke. "Claire," she whispered, like she had been waiting for me to answer, like she knew I was the only one who would. "Claire, is Oliver safe?" There was something brittle in her voice, a desperate kind of urgency that sent a sick, slithering dread up my spine, because I knew that voice. I had heard it before, months ago, in voicemails and old home videos stored on the family's iCloud. It was Margaret Holloway, Oliver's mother. The same Margaret Holloway who had died in a car accident with her husband 3 years ago. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat locked up, my mind screaming at me that this was impossible, that I was either asleep or losing my grip on reality, that there was no way I was hearing what I was hearing. But before I could hang up, before I could run back upstairs and bury myself under the covers and pretend this never happened, she spoke again, her voice raw and barely above a breath, like it was costing her something just to say the words. "Claire," she murmured, and I heard something else in the background, now faint, distorted, like whine through broken glass. "You need to watch him. He's not safe. He's not alone." Then the line went dead, and the house was silent again, and for the first time since moving in, I felt something I never had before. I felt like I wasn't alone either. I barely slept after that call, if you can even call what I did sleep. It was more like drifting in and out of a shallow, restless haze, my ears straining for any sound. My body coiled tight with the kind of unease that sinks into your bones and refuses to let go. I kept telling myself it had to be a prank, some sick bastard with a voice modulator who somehow knew my name, but no matter how I tried to rationalize it, no matter how many times I reached for logic like a lifeline, I couldn't shake the way she had spoken. So specific, so urgent, like she wasn't just warning me but begging me to listen. When the first pale slivers of morning light finally leaked through my bedroom window, I forced myself to move, to go through the motions of a normal day, to pretend I hadn't spent the night staring at the ceiling, pulse hammering in my throat. I got Oliver dressed, made his breakfast, sat with him at the kitchen table as he ate his cereal, all while trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, that nothing had really changed. But then right as I was clearing the dishes, Oliver looked up at me with those big, glassy blue eyes, head tilted slightly to the side in that way kids do when they're about to ask something innocent and bizarre, and what he said made my stomach twist into a cold, ugly knot. "Mommy says you should listen to her," he murmured between bites, spoon clinking softly against the bowl, his voice eerily calm, like he wasn't saying something that should have been impossible. I just stood there frozen, dish towel clutched in my hand, feeling my pulse stutter in my wrists and my throat, and every nerve ending in my body, because I hadn't told him about the call. I hadn't told anyone about the call. My breath felt too loud in the quiet morning air, my skin prickling as I forced my lips to move, to shape words that didn't sound like my own. What did you just say?" I asked, and Oliver just blinked up at me, expression placid, spoon halfway to his mouth, like he had already lost interest. "Mommy talks to me sometimes," he said simply, like it was the most normal thing in the world, like it wasn't breaking something inside of me to hear it. "She says you don't believe her yet, but you will." Then he went back to eating, completely unfazed, humming softly under his breath, some tuneless, discordant melody that set my teeth on edge, while I stood there, my hands shaking, staring at this little boy I had cared for every single day for months and wondering, for the very first time, if I had ever truly known him at all. I didn't say anything else to Oliver that morning. I couldn't. I just stood there, gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles ached, watching him eat his cereal like he hadn't just cracked open reality, and let something cold and slithering spill out into the daylight. I wanted to ask more, wanted to press him, to demand how he had heard his mother's voice, what exactly she had said, how long this had been happening. But every time I opened my mouth I felt this deep, gnawing fear coil in my stomach, some primal instinct whispering that I wouldn't like the answer. The rest of the day passed in a sickly blur of forced normalcy, me plastering on a smile as I took Oliver to the park, as I helped him with his puzzles, as I read to him before bed, all while feeling this awful crawling sensation between my shoulder blades like I was being watched. By the time I finally got him down for the night, my nerves were frayed raw, my thoughts unraveling into places I didn't want them to go, and as I sat on the edge of my bed, staring blankly at the darkened hallway outside my room, I made the mistake of glancing at the baby monitor. At first it looked normal, the soft glow of the nightlight casting long shadows over the room, the gentle rise and fall of Oliver's chest as he slept, but then the monitor flickered just for a split second, and when it came back the entire screen was warped static crackling at the edges. My breath hitched. The picture was still there, still Oliver's room, still his small sleeping form curled beneath the blankets, but now something else had changed. The closet door, which I knew had been shut, was open just a crack, a jagged sliver of pitch-black nothingness, and as I stared pulse hammering I saw the shadows inside the closet shift, like something was standing just beyond the frame, just out of sight, just waiting. My skin turned ice cold. The monitor crackled again, the static deepening, and then through the speakers, soft and broken, layered beneath the white noise, I heard it. A voice. A woman's voice. Faint, barely a whisper, but unmistakably there. "Claire." It breathed, distorted and low, as if the sound had traveled a long, long way to reach me. "Don't turn around." I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the monitor, my breath locked tight in my chest, my fingers gripping the sheets so hard the fabric nearly tore beneath my nails. The static kept hissing softly through the speakers, swelling and receding like something breathing on the other end of the line, and even though my brain was screaming at me to shut it off, to slam the screen down and pretend I had never heard that voice, I couldn't move. I just sat frozen, heart hammering, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it, that the exhaustion was making my mind twist sounds into something they weren't. But then, just as I finally reached out to turn it off, the shadows inside Oliver's closet shifted again, the darkness stretching and contorting like something was pressing against it from the inside. And for a single paralyzing second, I could have sworn I saw fingers, long and thin, curling slightly over the edge of the doorframe, the skin too pale, too smooth, like the shape of a human hand that had never actually belonged to a human at all. I wanted to scream, wanted to bolt into Oliver's room and tear that closet door off its hinges, but before I could move, the baby monitor flickered again, the screen distorting into jagged static, and then just as suddenly as it had come, the darkness inside the closet snapped back into place, like whatever had been there had simply slipped away. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes I felt that whisper slithering through my brain, that voice, soft, distant, almost pitying, telling me not to turn around. When the sun was finally up, when the shadows had retreated and I could convince myself that the night had simply gotten away from me, I forced myself to get up, to move, to act normal. But as I stepped into the hallway, heart still hammering, a sick, cold dread spread through me, because at the top of the stairs, in the exact same spot I had stood last night to answer that call, something was sitting on the floor. Small. Familiar. Innocent if I hadn't known better. Oliver's stuffed rabbit, the one he always kept tucked under his arm when he slept. The one that should have been in his bed. The one that was now facing me, ears pricked up, perfectly still. I stood at the top of the stairs, staring down at that stuffed rabbit, my breath shallow, my skin prickling with the kind of deep. It wasn't just the fact that the rabbit was there, sitting upright, placed with eerie precision in the exact spot where I had taken that call, or even the fact that I knew for certain Oliver had been clutching it tightly when I tucked him in the night before. It was something worse, something I couldn't quite put into words at first, like an itch in the back of my skull, an instinctive understanding that something about the house itself had shifted in the night, that whatever had been watching me through the monitor had stepped closer, had reached out, had left something behind just to let me know that it could. I forced myself forward, heart hammering, my fingers tightening as I picked up the rabbit, half expecting it to be ice cold, to reek of something rotting and foul, but it was just soft, just warm, just normal, except it wasn't. Because as soon as my fingers brushed the fabric, I felt this nauseating, static-like buzz in the back of my skull, a pulse of something wrong, and that was when I saw it, the thing I hadn't noticed before. Its head was turned. Just slightly. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough that if Oliver had been holding it in his sleep, its little black eyes wouldn't have been staring at him. They would have been staring at me. I put the rabbit back in Oliver's room without waking him, though every nerve in my body was telling me to scoop him up, to leave, to get as far away from that house as possible, but I couldn't, not yet, not until I understood what the hell was happening. I spent the entire day in a daze, drifting through the motions of childcare like a marionette with its strings cut, my hands moving automatically, my voice light and calm as I played with Oliver, fed him lunch, helped him with his drawings, all while my thoughts churned violently beneath the surface. But then, just as I was helping him wash his hands before dinner, I caught our reflection in the bathroom mirror, and my breath locked in my throat, my skin going cold, because for the briefest, most agonizing moment, I could have sworn something was wrong. His reflection was just a second off, just a fraction of a breath behind mine, his mouth parting in a smile that hadn't quite happened yet. And then he turned to look at me, his real face catching up with his reflection, his little head tilting to the side, his big, innocent blue eyes flickering with something unreadable. "Why do you look scared?" he asked, voice soft, curious, almost amused, and for the first time since I had started this job, I felt my stomach twist with a horrible, creeping certainty whatever had been calling me in the night. Whatever had been whispering through the monitor, whatever had been watching from the dark, it wasn't warning me about something outside the house. It was warning me about Oliver. I don't remember making the decision to look up the accident. It was like my body moved on autopilot, like some part of me had already accepted that there was no turning back, no unhearing the whispers in the monitor, no unseeing the too smooth way Oliver's reflection had lagged behind mine, no unfeeling the way my stomach twisted every time he looked at me just a second too long. But the moment I typed Holloway family car crash into the search bar, I felt my pulse slow. My breath stalled, the room around me shrink into something impossibly tight, like the walls were pressing in, like the house itself knew what I was about to find and wanted me to stop. There were articles, dozens of them, all the same, the tragic story of a loving couple, Margaret and Thomas Holloway, killed instantly when their SUV spun out on black ice, careened through a guardrail, and flipped 3 times before colliding with a tree. Their 6-year-old son miraculously surviving the wreckage with nothing but a few bruises, a medical impossibility that the doctors had chalked up to sheer, dumb luck, but as I scrolled further, my fingers numb, my skin prickling with something sour and electric, I found an older article, buried beneath all the condolences and memorial fundraisers, a short and clinical statement from the coroner that made my head go light, my stomach lurch up into my throat, because it confirmed what I already knew deep down but had been too terrified to say out loud. Only one body had ever been positively identified, only one set of remains had been conclusively confirmed through dental records, and the other, the one that was burned too badly to be properly examined, had been assumed to be the second parent, assumed to be either Margaret or Thomas Holloway, assumed to be human at all. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen, my heartbeat sluggish and heavy like something thick and tar-like was pumping through my veins instead of blood, my mind looping over the same unbearable realization again and again, trying to make it fit into something rational, something that didn't make my skin crawl or my stomach knot with a nausea so deep it felt like it had rooted itself inside me. But no matter how I tried to twist it, no matter how many explanations I grasped at, like fraying lifelines, there was only one truth staring back at me, stark and impossible and wrong. Something had walked away from that crash, something that wasn't supposed to, something that had slipped into the empty space where a 6-year-old boy should have been and worn him like a perfect seamless mask. I don't remember closing the laptop, don't remember moving at all, but suddenly I was standing in the hallway, the house impossibly silent around me, the air thick with something electric and waiting, my own breath the only sound breaking the hush, and then, just as I forced myself to step forward to do something, there was a noise, soft but deliberate, high above my head, a single dragging thump against the attic floorboards, followed by another, then another, slow and careful, like something up there knew I was listening, like it was moving just enough for me to hear, like it wanted me to come and find it. I don't know what possessed me to move toward the attic door instead of away from it. What kind of sick, primal curiosity dragged my feet forward when every nerve in my body was screaming at me to run, but I did. I reached up, fingers trembling, and pulled the cord, the ladder unfolding with a slow, deliberate creak that sounded too much like a groan, too much like something waking up, and as I hesitated at the base, staring up into the thick, suffocating blackness above, a smell hit me, cloying and wrong, something sour and wet and rotting, like damp earth and burnt hair and the coppery bite of old blood soaked too deep into the floorboards to ever truly fade. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, my pulse hammering against my ribs as I forced myself to climb one step, then another, the shadows pressing in around me with each agonizing inch until I reached the top, until my eyes adjusted just enough to make out the vague, hulking shapes of old furniture draped in white sheets, a rocking horse frozen mid-sway, a broken mirror propped against the wall, and then just as I exhaled, just as I let myself believe for one foolish, fleeting second that maybe the sounds had been in my head, that maybe I hadn't just invited something closer. I saw it, hunched in the farthest corner, too still, too silent, its limbs twisted at wrong angles, its body too long, too stretched, too thin, like something that had never learned how to sit like a person but was trying anyway. And then, slowly, impossibly, it moved, the darkness around it shifting as it turned its head toward me. And in the dim light spilling from the open hatch, I saw them. Two perfect, glassy black eyes staring back, empty and endless, reflecting my own pale, horrified face in the void. I don't remember climbing back down the attic ladder, don't remember how I got back to my room. But at some point I must have moved, must have functioned, because suddenly I was sitting on the edge of my bed, laptop open, fingers shaking as I typed Holloway Family Nanny into the search bar. Desperate for answers, for proof that I wasn't losing my mind, that someone else had seen what I had, that someone else had lived through this and could tell me what the hell I was supposed to do. It took less than 5 minutes to find her name. Bethany Krieger, early 20s, worked for the Holloways for just under a year before she vanished. Her car found abandoned on the side of a highway 2 states over. The doors locked, the keys still in the ignition. Her phone left sitting in the cup holder with a single outgoing call made at 3:14 a.m. to a number that no longer existed. My stomach turned to ice, my skin prickling with something sharp and electric as I scrolled through the article. As I stared at the grainy photo of a girl who looked too much like me, same dark hair, same tired eyes, same exhausted smile, like she hadn't been sleeping, like something had been keeping her awake. And then just as I clicked away, just as I started to shut the laptop, my phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from an unknown number lighting up the screen. And when I picked it up, when I forced myself to look, my breath caught in my throat, my stomach dropping into a pit so deep I almost felt weightless. Get out. Get out now. You don't have time. I don't remember getting up. I don't remember grabbing the phone. I forced myself to walk forward, down the corridor, towards Oliver's room, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run in the opposite direction, to get out, to heed the warning on the phone, to leave him, but my feet kept moving, something rough and desperate pushing me forward, because no matter who he was still a little boy, a child, my responsibility, and if there was even the slightest chance that some part of him was still there, still real, still him, I couldn't just give him up. My fingers wrapped around the doorknob, and for a brief, agonizing second I hesitated, goosebumps creeping up my skin with the suffocating certainty that the moment I walked inside, the moment I looked at him, I would see something I could never not see, something that would confirm without a doubt that I had never been truly alone in this house. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting, my pulse pounding in my ribs, and then, before I could talk myself out of it, before I could think, I pushed open the door. Oliver was already in bed, already waiting for me, his wide, glassy blue eyes fixed on mine, his lips curling in a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach them, that didn't belong to a child at all. I told you so, he whispered, tilting his head slightly, something stirring under his skin, something not quite right, something that made every hair on my body stand up. You should have listened to your mom. I don't know how I stayed upright, don't know how my legs didn't buckle beneath me, how I didn't collapse right there in the doorway, because the thing sitting in Oliver's bed, watching me, smiling at me like it had been waiting for this moment all along, was no longer pretending to be a little boy, not really, not fully, not in the way that mattered. His eyes were too still, too cold, too knowing, a hollow, glassy shade of blue that didn't reflect the light the way human eyes should. His skin stretched just a little too tight over his bones, his fingers twitching against the blanket as if he was testing them. As if he was adjusting to the body he had been wearing, making sure it still fit. And then, slowly, so slowly, he tilted his head, his smile widening, the corners of his mouth pulling back just a little too far. And that was when he spoke again, that same soft, sing-song lilt, that same impossible, stomach-turning familiarity. And it took me a second to understand why it sounded so wrong, why my stomach clenched and my breath caught and every nerve in my body revolted at the sound of it, because it wasn't his voice anymore. It wasn't a child's voice at all. It was deeper, raspier, warmer, the voice of a man, of someone older, someone grown, and when I finally found the strength to move, when I took a stumbling step backward, my shaking fingers clutching the doorframe like it could anchor me to reality, The thing in Oliver's skin laughed, a quiet, breathy sound that slithered under my skin like a living thing, and in that moment, I knew what had been left behind in the wreckage of that crash, what had been assumed to be too burned, too disfigured, too unrecognizable to identify, and why. Because it hadn't been one of Oliver's parents at all. It had been him. The real Oliver Holloway had never made it out of that car. I ran. I don't remember making the decision, don't remember turning, don't remember how my legs started moving beneath me, but suddenly I was running, stumbling blindly down the hall, my breath a ragged, uneven rasp in my throat. My pulse hammering in my ears so loudly it felt like the whole house was pulsing with it, like the walls were alive, like they were breathing, stretching, watching. Behind me, I heard it move, not hurried, not panicked, but slow, deliberate, patient, the soft creak of tiny footsteps against the floorboards, like it was in no rush at all, like it knew exactly how this would end, like it knew I wasn't getting away. I reached the stairs, half tripping in my desperation, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles ached, but as I took the first step down, I heard my name, low and sing-song, drawn out in a taunting hum, the voice neither child nor adult, neither male nor female. Just a stretched, hollow mockery of something human, and when I looked back, when I finally turned my head just enough to see, my stomach lurched, my vision darkened at the edges, because it wasn't Oliver anymore. It wasn't anything anymore. It stood in the doorway, too tall, too stretched, its limbs wrong, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its skin still wearing the shape of a child but too smooth, too waxy, as if it was struggling to hold the form, as if it was melting, unraveling. Its mouth stretching wide, too wide, curling into something that barely resembled a smile. And then, as I stood there frozen, my entire body screaming at me to move but unable to, it took a single, shuddering step forward, lifting one tiny, pale hand, tilting its head the other way, and whispered, almost fondly, almost lovingly, "Why are you running, Claire? Don't you know? You've been mine since the night you answered the phone." I don't know how I made it down the stairs, don't know how my legs kept moving when every muscle in my body was locking up with terror, when my vision was tunneling, when my breath was coming too fast, too sharp, like I was choking on the very air around me. But somehow I did, somehow I staggered into the foyer, my shaking fingers fumbling for the front door, yanking at the handle, yanking, 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 but it wouldn't budge, wouldn't even rattle in the frame, like the house itself had. Sealed shut, like the thing upstairs had decided I wasn't leaving, not now, not ever. My phone, I still had my phone, I realized, still had some tiny, fragile thread connecting me to the outside world, to someone who could help, and with trembling hands, I pulled it from my pocket, swiping at the screen, fingers slipping over the glass. Pulling up my call history, desperate, frantic, praying that I could still dial out, still reach someone real, but as I scrolled, as my eyes landed on the last incoming call, my stomach lurched so violently I thought I might be sick right there on the hardwood floor, because the number wasn't just unknown, it was impossible, a string of zeros stretching endlessly across the screen, like a hollow, endless void, like something that had never been a phone number at all. And then, as I stood there, shaking, my fingers gripping the device so tightly the plastic casing cracked under the pressure, the phone buzzed in my hand, the screen flashing with an incoming call, the same impossible, empty number, the same endless void. And I knew that if I answered, if I so much as breathed into that receiver, I would hear my own voice on the other end, whispering back at me, telling me something I could never unhear, something that would make me understand. Exactly why I had been chosen, why I had been brought here, why the doors were locked, why the thing upstairs was smiling, why I had never had a chance to escape from the moment I first stepped foot inside this house. I didn't answer the call. I couldn't. My fingers hovered over the screen, my breath locked in my chest, my entire body screaming at me that if I picked up, if I put that phone to my ear, if I let that voice slip into my head one more time, it would be over, it would have me completely. Entirely in a way that couldn't be undone. So I did the only thing I could think of, I threw the phone across the room, watched it skid across the hardwood, screen flickering, vibrating furiously against the floor, the incoming call still lighting up the display like something inside it was alive. Like it was trying to drag me back into its grip, but I didn't let myself look at it again, didn't let myself listen. Instead I turned, ran toward the stairs, because I knew, somehow I knew, that Oliver, or whatever had been wearing him, wasn't in his room anymore, that it was somewhere else, somewhere I hadn't dared to go before, somewhere that had been waiting for me all along. The attic. The door was open, the ladder already unfolded, stretching into the yawning darkness above, and I didn't stop, didn't hesitate, because I had to know, had to see what was hiding in the black. What had been watching me from the moment I first stepped into this house? What had been whispering through the walls, slithering through the phone lines, slipping its fingers into the cracks of my reality. My heart pounded as I climbed, each step creaking beneath my weight, the air growing thicker, heavier, wrong, and then I reached the top, pulled myself into the attic, turned toward the deepest corner of the room, and froze, my pulse slamming against my ribs. Because it was there. A shape. A thing. Not quite human, not quite anything, just a shifting, pulsing absence of light, of logic, of everything I had ever understood to be real, and it was waiting for me, its head tilting in recognition. Its mouth stretching wide in something that was almost a grin, and as it stepped forward, slow, careful, patient, I realized I had never been running from it. I had been coming home. I wish I could tell you I fought, that I clawed my way out of that attic, that I ran screaming into the night and never looked back, but the truth, the awful, sickening truth, is that I didn't move at all because the moment that thing stepped forward, the moment it reached out, the moment the air in the attic seemed to bend around it, pressing against me like something alive, something with weight, something with a pulse, I remembered. Not all at once, not in a flood, but in flashes and jagged electric slivers of something buried so deep inside me that I hadn't even known to look for it, hadn't even realized it was there. I remembered the phone ringing, not 2 weeks ago, not in this house, but years ago in a different room, in a different life, my small hand struggling to lift the receiver, my mother's voice, frantic, raw, whispering my name, telling me to listen. Telling me to run, and I remembered not understanding, not believing, not listening. I remembered the crash, the ice, the headlights spinning like dying stars, the metal folding, the flames licking at the edges of my vision, and I remembered something else too, something pulling me from the wreckage, something wrapping itself around me, something whispering in my ear, promising that I wasn't alone, that I would never be alone again. And as I stood there, breath hitching, heart slamming, my entire reality cracking open at the seams, the thing in the attic, my reflection, my shadow, my other half, smiled, its voice curling into my head like smoke, like static, like home. Claire, it said, and I swear I felt it wrap around me, sink into me, curl into the spaces I hadn't even known were empty. I told you. You've been mine all along. Then the lights flickered, the world tilted, and the last thing I remember is the phone ringing downstairs, over and over and over, filling the house with the sound of something that had been waiting for me to finally pick up.